Hi, this is Lady C. Welcome to another episode of The Critical Thought. And in this episode, Spike Robinson is going to be talking about the tools of undue influence, how they keep you in control. And what that means is a person who belongs to like a high controlled group, whether it be you're in a relationship or maybe your belief system or even your job. How do these people keep you under their control?
You're listening to The Critical Thought, where we challenge our listeners to use critical thinking when examining the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Spike, thank you so much for being on the program.
You are very welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're going to talk about the undue influences that people may come under, not even realizing it. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, one of the best maps that I can ever put out there was the map that was devised by Stephen Hassan and first published in his excellent book, Combating Cult Mind Control. He's called it the BITE, or B-I-T-E model, and the four components of these are the various parts of your life that are controlled by a high control or a high demand group. And these are B for behavior, I for information, T for thought, and E for emotion. Behavior control can be very severe, from members having to wear the same clothing or not eat certain meats or not drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes.
With the Jehovah's Witnesses and the behavior, they're looking at, not celebrating holidays, not taking blood transfusions, or even joining the armed forces.
Spike, both you and Lady C have made some very good points. The behavior is actually amazing, how Jehovah's Witnesses' behavior is controlled. I find it interesting that you use the word high control group. People sometimes use cult. I know personally, I just find that high control groups defines Jehovah's Witnesses so well. Sometimes when people think of cults, they think of some group that's moving out to the middle of the wilderness with some guru. But Jehovah's Witnesses, when you describe them as high control groups, it just fits so well, because literally every aspect of a Jehovah's Witness life, his behavior, is dictated. The clothes he can wear, the music he can listen to, the type of jobs he can have, careers. I mean, the list just goes on and on. I mean, literally right down to something as simple as the type of sexual relations that a husband and wife can have in their home. I mean, they get into everything. And later on, Lady C and I, we're going to do some videos on that, on those specific issues. But one of the things I think about when I talk to people about the witnesses is that witnesses, the behavior is really controlled by two things: written rules and unwritten rules. Written rules are rules that you can actually turn to a Watchtower or turn to a publication, and it's on page 17, paragraph 3. The other way, which is really interesting, and that is the unwritten rules. And the unwritten rules, as me and Lady C often talk about, these are the culture rules. There's a certain culture in Jehovah's Witnesses, and those rules dictate what people can do. And as you mentioned, it is always done in the context of this is what God wants you to do. And so as a result, it dictates and influences Jehovah's Witnesses' behavior.
That's a good point, JT. And then the second one is information. Many groups control information. I have seen people in Scientology who are not allowed to read anything they call N-theta, which means unhappy things, or other groups where you're not allowed to look up certain bits of information, or you're only told to watch certain TV channels or not watch TV at all. And certain places you definitely can't go on the internet.
Once you become one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you are pretty much discouraged from reading any information that was published by any other religious denomination.
Oh, absolutely. No question about that. I remember there was a movie, or there was a TV show or something, and one of the actors made the point that he that controls the information, he controls the world. And for the most part, that is a very powerful statement, because if you can control what information people get, It influences what they can and cannot do and what they think. I mean, years ago, they used to have this commercial. It showed this couple riding around, and the husband, they had just bought a house, and they went into this new neighborhood, and their houses were over there. And the couple, they were like, we didn't know those houses were over there. And that's because they didn't have the right information on, the real estate property they were looking for. And that really applies to really almost anything, and specifically when it comes to Jehovah's Witnesses. What they can and cannot read is dictated to them. And it's interesting how it's done. I remember talking to a former Jehovah's Witness who had a Russian background. He was an older gentleman. He had grown up in the Soviet Union under their rule. And he talked about how they control information. You only had the Russian television. You only had the Russian newspapers. So the information that they got about the West or the United States or Europe and England and so forth, it was simply limited to what they were given through their sources. And it's kind of interesting how that's the way it is often with Jehovah's Witnesses. As Lady C had mentioned many times, Jehovah's Witnesses, they cannot read, or they are discouraged from reading anything that's not really published by the Watchtower Society, especially if it's of a religious nature. And that's why Jehovah will absolutely refuse to accept a tract or something when someone's at the door. They'll say, well, I just took your magazine. You can take a tract from my church. The witness will typically say no. Now, the politically correct witnesses, they will accept it and smile, and then when they walk away, they'll throw it in the trash. But the control of information is really the key. And what will happen is, and I've seen this so many times, if you go to a Jehovah's Witness home, and Jehovah's Witnesses have what's called a theocratic library, and their library will consist predominantly of books produced by the Watchtower Society. And the basic position of Jehovah's Witnesses is pretty simple. Jehovah's Witnesses are basically, as a culture, they are pretty much discouraged and told to stay away from reading any information if the information contradicts what the Watchtower writers have said. So basically, your average Jehovah's Witness, you won't find a lot of books in their home of a religious nature that contradicts what the Watchtower writers have said in terms of explanation of Scripture. And in fact, when witnesses will go over to each other's homes, if they happen to be looking at your library and they see a book that they perceive is, why are you having this book in your home? They'll often tell you, or they'll make statements. Now, you always got those outliers. I remember a brother back home. He was not an elder, was not a minister, but he enjoyed reading, and so he had Billy Graham's book. He had everything, and it was something that people often talked about. Brother so and so, he got all them other religion books in his house. So the control of information by the Watchtower is powerful. So your typical Jehovah's Witness, he's not going to really read a lot of material that contradicts what the Watchtower writers have said. He won't look at a different perspective. That's just not what he does. And the way they couch it, they'll couch it in terms of mature ones. I remember as an elder, we were having an elder school, and the instructor, brothers were trying to deal with people in the congregation who had issues with emotional depression and so forth. And so a lot of the elders were starting to do a little extra reading on different books and so forth. And some brothers were even taking little classes on mental health and so forth. And man, the instructor just shot that down. He says, there's no need to be reading all these books for psychologists and all this kind of stuff. The society has everything that you need. And so when you create this culture, and this is one of the things that I stress to people, there are two aspects of Jehovah's Witnesses. There's the written rules, and then there's that culture. And that culture is powerful.
Extremely tight, it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. No question about that.
Mm-hmm. Then the third level of control is thought control. This is found in many, many different traditions, and even in relationships as well, as you are given things that are called thought-stopping techniques, where as soon as you start thinking about something that is not good to think about, like, why am I doing this? Why am I with these people? You're told that that thought comes from Satan, or from your baser human nature, or from somewhere else, and you have to stop it. A Hare Krishna will often chant, Krishna, Krishna, Hare Krishna, 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 and start chanting in order to drive the bad thoughts away, using scriptures or prayers or chanting or rocking or meditation techniques. These are all ways of stopping critical thought.
Oh, absolutely. With Jehovah's Witnesses, I remember, just listening to the brothers, talking about the conversations that we have. They would monitor, what you said. So if you had four people that were in a conversation and somebody started to talk negative about the organization or talk negatively about another person, but this is mainly in terms of this being the truth or not, because a lot of witnesses do talk about each other. But when you start questioning the organization, they'll say you should, the Christian or the spiritual person will steer that conversation into something more positive. And if you really could talk about things and discuss what you didn't think that was great about what they were teaching, this religion probably wouldn't even exist.
Lady C makes a very valid point about many times when Jehovah's Witnesses are having a conversation, especially as a little group, if someone perceives that the conversation is going in a certain direction, you're encouraged to redirect it, even if it may be something that's of a valid point. A person could be raising an absolutely valid point, but if it's not in line, they're going to be encouraged to switch over how you think, what you're discussing. And it's kind of interesting because when you think about it, one of the things that they often use for thought control is how they always associate everything with God. So you begin to believe everything that you hear is from God. I often tell people, for the average, especially for like an elder or something, and even the average witness, if something says, the Bible says, Jesus says, the society says, the Watchtower says, the governing body says, Holy Spirit says, a Jehovah's Witness sees no difference in any of those. They all run the same with the same authority, same decision making, and you can really understand that. The Watchtower once made the point that you need to listen to us as you would the voice of God himself. That's an amazing position to take as journalists and writers, that you listen to the voice of God. They refer to it as listen to the slave. And it's kind of interesting because just recently they redefined who the slave is. The slave is 7 individuals who live in the state of New York. So all of a sudden you get these people making a statement that you need to listen to these 7 individuals in New York as you would the very voice of God himself. And so that type of thought control is absolutely powerful.
That's a very good point. One of the things about Scientology is that you're not even supposed to talk amongst yourselves as to what you're actually doing in your very private, what they call auditing sessions. That's their form of, call it therapy, I suppose. But you cannot compare notes with another practitioner of the faith because it won't line up. They know it won't line up, so don't talk about it.
Yeah, because you know what? To me, it's like a meeting of the minds. And a lot of times, you've done this yourself. You've had things happen in your life, and you've picked up the phone, and you've called a friend, and you've asked for advice, and you've asked them, what would you do in this situation or under these circumstances? And then that person would give you their take on it, and you'll be like, man, I never thought about that. And maybe you may call a few more people. You may call 1 or 2 more people to get their ideas or their thoughts on something that you're working on or whatever you're trying to make a decision for. So they know that the meeting of the minds would definitely break down those teachings, and people will be saying, why are we doing this?
Indeed, I've heard it over and over again, and not just from Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, it doesn't matter what other people think. What does Jesus think? Or what does Jehovah think? Because honestly, it's not what Jehovah thinks or even what God thinks. It's what the governing body wants you to think that God is thinking. And that's the biggest thought control of all, is the ability to make people think that we're speaking for divinity.
Yep, that's a very good point.
So then the final is the emotional control. And you see this a lot of the time. You're supposed to be happy. After all, you've found the truth. So you must be happy, because if you aren't happy, what's wrong with you? It can't be the group, so something must be wrong with you. After a while, someone in a high control group or a coercive relationship will find themselves making it look as if you are happy all the time and everything is all right, because after all, you are a member of the greatest group on earth, or the greatest relationship on earth. There is also another form of emotional control where you are not supposed to be too happy or too sad. You're supposed to be on a very even keel. This is done in a lot of the Eastern sort of religions or faith traditions, but it's also done in a coercive setting where any emotion is just too much.
Oh yeah, the emotional impact of how Jehovah's emotions are controlled. Let me give you an interesting example of how Jehovah's Witnesses can have their emotions controlled. Let's say you have a Jehovah's Witness. He's a man, he's married, got a family, and he has a problem with alcohol. He gets drunk. As a result, this man, he loses his family, his wife, she leaves him, goes back to her mom's house. He loses his job. He's disfellowshipped from the Jehovah's Witness religion because of his drinking problem, drunkenness. So he decides to get some help. So he goes out and he seeks the AA, Alcohol Anonymous program that's run by Jehovah's Witnesses to help people. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Jehovah's Witnesses don't run those programs. Instead, this man goes over to the Presbyterian Church that is running the AA program. And so after about a year, he comes in for his last day and he tells all those who are there that, I got my wife back. I got my job back. I haven't had anything to drink. I haven't touched any alcohol in over a year. Got my life back together again. Well, what will happen is all of these people will perhaps end up clapping. Some might stand. Great job. Good to hear this. Fantastic. Fantastic. So all these people celebrate this joy and happiness with this man by clapping and so forth. The same individual goes to the local kingdom hall. He's got his wife back, got his job back. He's now being reinstated back into the Jehovah's Witness denomination. And when his name is read off that he is reinstated as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, not one person, listen to me very carefully, not one person is able to clap for him. And why? Now, here's an occasion where here's a man basically coming back to God, as it were, and not one person can express it by clapping. This is absolutely amazing, and this is something that I always have found just fascinating. Even when I was a Jehovah's Witness, here's a man coming back, and yet none of the elders, none of the ministerial servants, nobody can clap and welcome this brother back. So you would have people who were ready to clap, but they knew better than not to clap. Fast forward a few years, what does the society do? The Watchtower tells Jehovah's Witnesses that now you can clap. It's okay to clap now. Now, it's interesting how that this clapping had absolutely nothing to do with God. Because if it was wrong to clap last week, then it's wrong to clap this week. But what you are seeing right in front of your eyes is how Jehovah's Witnesses, their emotions can be controlled. So now everybody can clap. And the fascinating thing about it is you will actually hear Jehovah's Witnesses make the statement, isn't it wonderful that the society now lets us clap? It's absolutely amazing. They are happy because they've been given permission to show emotions for a brother who is getting his life together. It's absolutely amazing. And so people, the witnesses' emotions are controlled in so many ways. I mean, it's just so interesting. I mean, it's amazing how we just never stood back and thought about these things seriously many times.
Mm-hmm. That's a very, very real way of controlling. And that can lead us into a kind of wider set of tools, because Steve Hassan's bite model is, of course, a wonderful starting point. But the real heavy-duty list is Lifton's thought reform criteria.
Well, this brings us to the end of this program. If you want to get more information about mind control and the bite model, be sure to check out Steve Hassan's book, Combating Cult Mind Control. And we want to thank you so much, Spike, for being on our program to discuss Steve Hassan's bite model. And in the next podcast, we're going to resume discussing Lifton's thought control criteria. So thank you so much for tuning in.
Thanks for having me, Lady C and JT.
This program was sponsored by Critical Thinkers.